Okay, first thing we'll do is we'll put the fitting in the bag. Makes it easier to install later. Some sort of sealant is required. Teflon. I like blue Loctite. Probably don't want to use red Loctite. Depending on where you have your compressor mounted or anything like that, you can face the fitting wherever you want, but I usually like to face it straight in. Alright, fitting is on. Next, upper bag bracket. Pre-install the bolts, as they're kind of shrouded by this, so you want to make sure you can get them in there. Then snake it around the fitting. Line up your holes. Get your end wrench in there and start tightening. Then you're going to go until it's snug, but you can still slide the bag slightly, because once we get all the brackets tightened in, we'll move the bag around to where the alignment looks the best. But it's a lot easier to spin them now than it is once it's all installed. So get it to where you can just barely still slide the bag. Now you can kind of see why we install the fitting first, even though it makes the step a little more cumbersome. It'd be hard to spin the fitting once the bracket is installed with bolts. Okay, those are snug. You can still slide it around just a little bit. Perfect. Okay, now we'll install the bottom bracket. That's this one. And you want this side of the bracket to be on the fitting side. Lock washer, flat washer. Okay, now on this bolt, you want to snug it as well, kind of like the top one. But what you want to do then, flip it back over, look at the two bolts to make sure that they're about the same distance in, and that the fitting is relatively centered in the slot. Because we're going to be looking at this edge and lining it up with the bottom bracket to make sure it's straight with this one. So we want to make sure it's straight with the bag. That looks pretty good right there. Flip it over, and then look at like this to this, this to this. Just make sure they're relatively straight with each other. And then fully tighten this one, because you won't be able to get it once the brackets are installed in the truck. Nope. Okay. Now the bracket is pre-assembled. I usually like to put the airline on it as well. Sometimes this little fitting is up in there, or the little barrel is up in there, and it's sometimes hard to get a wrench on, so usually easier to do at this point. Slide the barrel on, make sure you're fully seated past the barb. Slide that in. No sealant required. And like there's a 13 millimeter end wrench over there. Has a blue stripe on it. And just tighten until it stops, and then just give it just a little bit more. That's all you need for that. Okay, so that's pre-assembled. Now, turn our attention to here. You have to remove the bump stop and the bump stop cup. Leave this. So if you feel around there, you're going to feel a couple spots where there's weld. One right there, a decent long one there, and that's about it, just the front and the rear. So usually you can do it with a cutoff wheel on a grinder. Sawzall works pretty well as well. Just be careful of any lines or anything behind. So that should be fine. It's up underneath there, so just be cautious. And then as you're going, you can sometimes see it pop down, and that usually means you're through the weld. You go grab a hammer really quick. Sometimes if you give it a couple of hits with the hammer, it'll open up, and then you can see what else needs to be cut. So basically you're just removing the cup and the bump stop. You can make sure you got a nice flat surface there. Everything feels good. At this point, if you live in a place that salts their roads and things like that, you may want to just give a little coat of undercoating or touch up paint right there if it has any rust on it or whatever. That one looks pretty good. Okay. Now we need to unbolt the brake line bracket right here. We're going to take out this bolt right here just so we can pull that bracket back. Feel free to use whatever kind of tools you want. We're just trying to show it as low buck as possible with just hand tools and a sawzall. Really, you only need 13 millimeter wrench, a 9/16 or 14 millimeter wrench, and then 9/16 shallow and deep sockets on a 3/8 ratchet, and that's about all you need to do the bracket kit. Now the brake lines have a little bit of give to them. Clean off any sawzall dust. Now there's a few different ways you can approach this. Usually, that looks like it's going to be a little tight. Actually, that is going to be right in the way. Okay, next thing you want to do is take loose the emergency brake cable hanger right here. Once again, 13 millimeter wrench. Okay, once you have your brackets loosely installed, then the next step is you have two top clamps. 1, 2. They sit with the U facing like this on top of the frame. Same thing, U facing up on top of the frame. Yeah, then you're going to put a washer on each one. And you're going to put them in from the bottom. Then another washer on top of the clamp. And a lock nut, just finger tight. In all 4 spots. At this point, you're not super concerned how straight they look or anything like that. We'll adjust that once we get to tightening. The inner ones you can usually reach around and feel up in there. This one can kind of be a little tricky because of the bag, but there's also some wiring loom up in there that you probably want to go inside of, if at all possible. There's also a little brake line bracket up there. Sometimes it also helps if you slide the washer all the way up. Okay, now we have the bolts in. Put them behind the wire looms. Okay, now we have our bottom clamp. Other side. Okay, now at this point we can tighten the bottom. What you want to do is go until you have about 1/4 of an inch in between these two right here, and then do the other side, and then you just kind of want to even it out. Swap to the other side. Okay. Now the bottom is good. Now to the top. Same thing as the bottom. Go until you have about 1/2 inch of thread sticking out of the nut on the outside. Move to the inside one. Back to the outside one. Okay, now the front. Okay, now I'm going to slide the parking brake cable back up into the little gap right there. So that's good. Bottom's tight, top's tight. Now last thing we got to do is double check and see how our bag alignment is and adjust if necessary. Checking bag clearance to make sure you have air gap all the way around it, not rubbing anything. Everything looks good. Looks like the top needs to come that way a little bit. Looks pretty good. Still got adequate clearance everywhere. That's why we left the top two loose. Now we can come back, reach in there and final tighten them. There's one of them. There's the other one. There's limited space, so what I was doing is getting on it, twisting it until it stopped, flipping the wrench, grabbing it again, flipping the wrench 180 each time, and now everything's tight. We already did our airline on both the bags, so now we just got to tee them. All the bolts look like they're nice and straight up and down. Clamps look like they're nice and flat. Same amount sticking out of a thread sticking out of the top of the nut, so that means that everything's in there nice and straight. Cap on our clamps are equal. Bag looks decent. So now it's just a matter of doing the air management. Okay, so now we're going to plumb it. So put a little fitting on the end of the compressor line. Now we're going to tee. This side's going to go back to the bags. This is going to go up to the gauge. Yeah, that just comes on the compressor. As usual, slide the barrel down the hose. Leave a little bit hanging out. Push onto the barb until all the way seated against the shoulder. Slide that up. Thread it on. You can orient your fitting whichever way you want, and then usually leave it a little bit counterclockwise of where you want it to end up, because right when you tighten the last little bit, it'll try to twist on you. So we want it to run straight with the truck. We'll go like this. Actually, this is a swivel right here. Actually, no, there's a swivel right there. So we can do this and then put that one on last. And that one's not either one of these is pipe thread, so all right, let's try this again. Yeah. Okay, so now we're going to route our airlines. Now, there's a couple things to keep in mind. First thing is, depending on where you mount them, if you're going to mount them to the axle to come across, you need to leave a little slack, because when the bag air's up and down, it has about 5 inches of travel, so you got to allow for that if you're going to attach to a moving part of the suspension. You don't have to. You can attach it somewhere else that's fixed, and then you don't have to take that into account. What we might do is we'll see if we can get it to come through one of the crossmember tubes. That might be the best way to do it. I was going to attach it to the e-brake cable, but see if we can run it forward and get it away from the exhaust.
Got a heavy load on the back.
So the reason I came to you guys is because we were loading some dirt in front of my yard, and the rear end collapsed. It was that much dirt, it was that heavy. So I was introduced to you guys, and now life is a lot simpler. And it's better. And it works awesome. That's all I can tell you.
How easy was everything for you?
Push the button.
Yeah.
Push the button. That's all it is.
All right.
It's 2 buttons, one to let the air out, one to put the air in. It's that simple.
We certainly appreciate everything, Manny.
Right.